Okay, we're going to get started. This is stepping up the eSourcing game.
So thinking about eSourcing, stepping up the eSourcing game, I'd like to kick it off by understanding from each of your perspectives, which are varied, different industries, industrial automation, high-tech manufacturing, higher education. When you look at deploying eSourcing technology, what did you consider to be the critical requirements and some of the key success factors for deploying a technology solution for eSourcing? So Candace, maybe get your thoughts on it.
So it was kind of the first on our priority scale. So it was the first piece that we attacked and we approached. Because previous to going through the process of selecting Zycus, we were still going through Excel files, sending via email, getting the responses back that way. And considering the number of SKUs and the number of suppliers that several of our larger events would have to go through, for us that became kind of the critical business need. And some of the selection points we looked at is kind of like I talked about the larger events, scale of part and supplier combination that we were looking at. And then also we were going to have users that would be in there every now and then and users that would be the power user in there all the time. So how easy is it for them?
So both ease of use but scalability to handle complexity. So since all things are relative, Candace, how do you define a large event, both in terms of the quantity of items and supply?
So to give an example, and this is actually one of the pieces where we worked closely with Zycus in developing the tool. The largest event that we wanted to put through the tool was, I think, just over between 8 and 9,000 parts and about 80 suppliers. And we purposefully did our largest event first, so that we could kind of pressure test the tool and what we were looking for.
Put us to the test right from the get-go.
Yes.
Great. Stress test. That's a great strategy. Thanks, Candace. And Karen, probably some similarities when you think about large, complex sourcing projects and bid packages and so on in the high-tech manufacturing industry as well. But be interested to hear your perspective on key requirements and critical success factors.
So for us, really, we had an existing solution and one that had been in place for quite some time. So we had sourcing managers that were very familiar with the existing system. The criteria were ease of use and the capability to at least hopefully mirror or get better results out of the tool from what we had existing already. So it was a matter of making sure that the feasibility and interface of the tool itself was very self-explanatory, and I think we could gain benefit in that area specifically by switching to Zycus. And then, like you said, there's the complex categories that are going to maybe drive formula-driven results in a pricing scenario. And there's a lot of flexibility within the tool to be able to do that as well. Another key thing I think for us also though was language capability, because we're a global organization that has sourcing managers in all areas around the globe. And for them to be able to go in and modify the systems in their own language and for suppliers to interface, that was also important for us.
The global aspect as well. Very helpful. And Jamie, so these folks are making products, manufacturers. You're making our future with educated young people at Liberty University. How would you contrast sourcing requirements in the higher education model maybe with the manufacturing world?
I think our situation was a little bit different in that we already had the eSourcing tool from Zycus when I got there, but we had nobody who did any sourcing and nobody that was in the user group. So we had this piece of software that was sitting there that wasn't being utilized.
You had technology before a process.
Correct. Correct. So our biggest question was, who are our users going to be? Is it going to be departmental, where we let the departments use the tool on their own? Is it going to be centralized, where we as procurement do all of it for them? So that was really our first question. And trying to, for those of you who know in higher ed, trying to navigate the politics of departmental user groups has been a challenge, to say the least.
Only imagine. That's great. So very different requirements and perspectives across the board. That's what we set out to accomplish. So we cover a lot of ground. That's great. Be interested for each of you to share with us Number one, when you looked at eSourcing and deploying the technology, did part of your process require building a business case? And if so, what did you consider to be the key value levers in constructing that business case for eSourcing?
So I think for Rockwell, there were a couple of pieces. One, since we didn't have a tool, there was a piece of productivity there, but to be honest, I don't know that that was the largest one on the scale. More so than that, it was documents retention, risk mitigation, really being able to have a standard business process versus it kind of leading up to the sourcing manager and everyone doing things a little bit differently. So that standardization, I think, was a big piece for us. If we have a sourcing manager that's picking up and moving to a different category, and we have someone else coming new, having that history there to be able to utilize for the extension of sourcing events after is a big piece that didn't exist.
Yeah, and just as a follow-up, I'd imagine does standardization and process efficiency translate to the bottom line in the form of, either more throughput, doing more events, or better velocity, doing them faster, or both, perhaps?
I'd say a little bit.
Okay, great.
And cost avoidance.
And did you actually formally submit a business case to get sign-off? Is that part of the process?
Ours is more of a, these are the projects, or these are the things that we want to do for the year. And that would go into our annual planning process, and then we get approved or not. So not necessarily a formal report per se, more presentation style.
Karen, I'm interested in your perspective as well.
So for anyone that was in the last session with Gary, our main focus was really to look at analyze, and then we kind of broadened our scope. But the business case development was focused on us bringing analyze into our organization and how we're going to utilize that. But then there were secondary components for how we're going to replace eSourcing. And the big business case driver there obviously was around cost and capability of the system. So those were elements of it, but the primary driver on the business case was for analyze in our instance. But there were very clearly defined benefits that we were going to see by making that shift, understanding we have to also go through a change management.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting in the different case scenarios that we've got here. We've got one that was a clean sheet of paper, so to speak, or a clean Excel spreadsheet, maybe better metaphor. We had a replacement and an inherited system, right? Because Zycus was already there when you arrived.
Correct.
So I assume you didn't have to go back and put together a business case, but as you think about the potential value levers and how you justify, what do you see that?
Well, I think we had a unique situation in that it was already there, so we didn't have to build a business case, but we had to kind of rebuild one because now we've got a piece of equipment that's sitting there, a piece of software that's sitting there, that there were probably promises made about what it's going to do for the university 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So now we have to kind of reapproach that and go, okay, well, we know it didn't work last time, but it's going to work this time. So we kind of still had to go through that business case to show, all right, we should actually implement it and use it. We already had it.
Yeah, and nobody wants shelfware. So there's still shelves in the cloud, by the way. It's still possible. So we don't want shelfware. You don't want it. It was sold based on a business case justification at one point. So now it's how do we maximize that? And compared and contrasted Zycus against other alternatives that you had in the market. Be interested to share with us a little bit about your process. How did you go through the technology platform evaluation and selection process?
Sure. So I think there's probably 3 areas that are the biggest for us. 2 I kind of talked about already. One is the scalability of the events, and so that was a big plus that Zycus had over some of the competitors in the market. Ease of use was a big one as well. And then the last one would be, especially since it was kind of a blank sheet of paper, we did have a process in place, but we knew that there were going to be changes along the way. So being able to have the agility and the much shorter development cycle that Zycus has was a big benefit as well.
And would you say you scoured the marketplace and evaluated a lot of different providers, or did you save yourself a lot of time to get to the right answer?
We did kind of a precursory look at a large number to narrow that bid down to like 6. And then from there, we did our full RFP activity with that six.
So very sort of traditional strategic sourcing process. If you're going to deploy a sourcing tool, we use good sourcing process to select a sourcing tool, right? Karen, how about in your case?
It was, similar, and whenever we're doing any kind of evaluation, we have five main areas that we look at, and it's the technology and quality, the cost, the flexibility, and the service. And within each of those components, the key drivers obviously were, again, usability was big for us, obviously, because it was going to be a change and an existing system was in place. So we needed to make sure that sourcing managers were going to feel comfortable with that, but also the actual capability of what it could do compared to what we had today. So we had to get some formal demonstrations from the providers to really dive in and ask some specific questions. Well, we know this, tool can do this, and or how does your interface work related to that? So there was a scorecard evaluation from all five of those levels, but also the demo and interactive interaction with the supply base to get those questions answered.
Yeah, I was thinking there must be a report card somewhere we could get feedback on. And I think the other tidbit there is don't rely on the vendor's generic demo approach, right? Make them conform to your use case and show how it goes. So Jamie, again, your story may be a little bit different.
Yeah, but I mean, we've gone through other RFP processes with other software suites, and Zycus has participated in, we've got e-procurement actually going on right now, and we've done TME and a few others. And I think for us, the key is, because we are still going through a cultural change where we're trying to get kind of buy-in from other groups to understand what we're trying to accomplish, one thing that Zycus has done very well is know their audience. They're not speaking way up here to people that they assume already know all of the ins and outs of procurement. They're able to kind of tailor those demos to who their audience is, and that's been a big help.
Oh, excellent. That's great to hear. So whenever there's a change, whether you're starting without a tool and deploying one, replacing one, whatever, there's usually some tipping point, where, and the phrase I like to think about is that change happens, when the pain of where you're going to is less than the pain that you currently have today. Was there some kind of tipping point in your business? And Candace, I think I can guess in your cases, we got these massive bid packages with, 8,000, 9,000 line items and hundreds of suppliers. How are we going to manage that? Any other key aspects that said we've got to do this and we've got to do it now?
The other piece I think is the repetitive nature of some of the business as well. So you have the strategic side of it that's going to have the larger events, but then we also have a lot of one-off or much smaller quote activity that I think our biggest benefit is in the standardization. Interesting part is that's our, I think, largest adoption issue. Just because with them being one-offs, it's very easy to shoot off the map. So allowing the user to really understand the benefits of being able to utilize a tool to do that, whereas you spend the time up front. After that, the cycle time is the same or smaller. So going through that process.
Sure. Well, one thing that comes to mind is, I'm sure this never happens, but do you ever have any turnover? People leave the organization and they move from one category to another.
Right.
If they did that event in an email instead of in an enterprise tool, have you really captured the knowledge as part of that process? I'm sure you actually do have that challenge, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Great. So Karen, anything that just said, it's time, we've got to make a change?
Well, we were on a basic platform that was not going to be continued to be upgraded by our the former company we were working with too. So we were going to have limitations on what that tool could do, and we had severe budget constraints. So in looking at the overall spectrum of the supply base and what we could do, we knew that we could introduce the technology, maintain the flexibility that we had, but then also benefit from a cost perspective. So, and I think from a change management perspective on rolling out an entirely new program, that there are tipping points when that license dies and the new one starts, right?
That's a compelling event.
The real key for us was the communication around, okay, this is going to happen, and building the runway and how you're preparing everybody for the change. So that was key for us.
Very interesting. And Jamie, I might phrase the question a little bit differently in your case. We both happen to live in Virginia. And I know that Liberty University, and not everyone may be aware of it, is now the largest university system in the state of Virginia.
7th largest in the country.
7th largest in the country. So I think in terms of a tipping point, how do you deal with that kind of growth?
Well, and I can tell you almost the exact day it happened. So the board comes out with their 5-year strategic plan, and there's $400 million in capital improvements. And it's the now what?
Now what?
Question. So you have to figure out, all right, we're not getting a bunch of new headcount. We're not getting consultants to come in and do all of this for us. What are we going to use? And luckily we had some tools in place, not enough. We're still working on the other piece of it. But really just through growth, we had to figure out how we're going to do this, and technology is the ideal way to do that.
Right, because I assume that even with the growth in the university, you're not getting a lot of additional resources.
Correct.
So technology is an imperative in that.
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm with you. So in terms of the benefits, I'd be interested in each of your perspectives to A, understand, do you feel like you've achieved the benefits you expected to get, like you mentioned, standardization, Candace, but B, were there any that were sort of unexpected that folks in the audience might want to be aware of as well?
Sure. I would say realization, because we focus so much on more the standardization and business process, it's definitely there. The ability to have templates, the ability to, at a global scale, be able to say, hey, this is where you go and grab the information. And then as we've had people transition commodities, I think it's been a huge benefit as well. Part of our process and implementation was completely updating both our sourcing and contracting policies and procedures as well. So we were able to really utilize our change management process to allow ourselves to be more lean, I guess you could say. And then the other piece I would say that's been unexpected is with the way that the eSource tool works, and by having a lot of the RFI and auction capabilities, we've been able to leverage many other areas of the organization outside of procurement to allow them to use that functionality to capture information externally. So it's been, I would say, not only a procurement tool, but it's becoming more of an operations tool that we've been able to use.
So adoption outside of procurement has been one of the unexpected.
Yes,
Maybe that.
definitely.
Okay, excellent. Karen, what things you expected and maybe some you didn't?
Yeah, so, we were expecting similar results, so we got that with Zycus. The tool itself had the capability to run the types of events that we were running and give us those same results. So those were good things. Some of the additional benefit, I think, the repository of information is key. One thing that may be helpful for those that are potentially transitioning from one to the other is you have an existing database of information and events, and then you're shifting to another one. We didn't build that into our former contract to easily extract that information to save it, so we had to go through a manual process to capture and keep it. So we made sure we built that into our existing contract. So in the event of a change, because business is ever changing, when we come to that place, then Zycus will help us with it and if we ever have to ship off tools. So that was one of the things that just thinking about it was a benefit that we see.
Your data may be in the cloud, but it's your data.
That's right.
At the end of the day, you need to know you can get it at any time you need to. And Jamie, again, maybe looking forward a little bit more, what would you envision as the key benefits?
Well, I think adoption outside of procurement is a big one. We've actually, kind of to benefit ourselves, have established a very good rapport with IT because of being able to do this kind of thing. IT, just because of who they are, they love technology. And they're kind of eating it up, and they see what their spend is. Like IT hardware is a great example. Between students and faculty that aren't on campus, there's a lot of IT hardware that they have to buy. And they've kind of floundered for years being able to come up with a great program. And now that we've been able to kind of show them how to do that more effectively, now it's a lot easier to get them to help us with new stuff as well. So it's definitely a win-win. But I agree.
And Jamie, talking about this phenomenon of the cloud, software as a service, did it take any convincing with your IT group to get them comfortable with the cloud?
You know, that's a good question. We still have those conversations back and forth. I think because of the growth period that we're in, they're probably a little more receptive to cloud now because they don't have the resources to put into actually having that on site. So it's a little easier right now, but it still feels like it's difficult for them to say, okay, yeah, let's do the cloud. But you know, it's kind of a worse of two evils. Is it going to be another year to implement, or is it going to be any time?
Right, speed to benefit, absolutely. So I'm thinking about eSourcing in each of your businesses, and wanted to share with the audience here any particular categories that you prioritize for eSourcing. Does it work equally well for goods and services, and is anything sort of off limits when it comes to eSourcing?
You gotta answer the last question first. I don't know if there's anything that's off limits necessarily. We started, especially since we didn't have a tool in place already on the direct side, just from the efficiency and quantity side of it. So we started in our semiconductors and passive space because that was one where we go out for work on an annual basis, and it's a large number of SKUs. So that was definitely, I think, where we built our business case around to be able to speed up that process. But we've also looked at the tool on our indirect space as well. We've done quoting activity within many of our different services space, and we've done a few auctions in the MRO space as well.
Interesting. So while eSourcing can apply, the platform and the techniques really across the board, auction may be more of a selected use in a very specific case.
And I would say from our perspective, that's more so because not many of our categories are commoditized. So the ability to do that is a lot less since we're very much designed in a lot of our SKUs.
Yeah, and Karen, would be interested from an A&D perspective as well. You see broad-based applicability and maybe there aren't categories that are off limits, but are there some that are tougher to gain procurement involvement with? I always think the classic one that's mentioned is, marketing. Marketing just won't let us get in there because it's creative, you just don't understand, you can't possibly apply strategic sourcing. I don't know if that comes up for you.
Well, yeah, nothing's off limits.
Nothing, yeah.
Anything can be put through the tool. And I think on the services side of things, I think there's ability to auction depending on how well your requirement structure has been defined, right? Because if you have some loose requirements around it that can't be well defined, then you have very different bidding scenarios. But if you can get more concrete in your end goal solution of what you're trying to achieve and have clear understanding of what that is and then apply it into the tool, I think then you can be successful in auctions on the services side. Speaking specific to marketing, yes, they're very creative and wonderful people that we work with and engage in. Actually, Kat is our sourcing manager that now works directly with the marketing team. But developing ERFPs, getting them to start to think about, okay, well, what about bringing some competition into this space and utilizing the tool to do that. I think we've opened some doors there. Still work to do. Always will be work to do.
Interesting. And Jamie, in the university context, you've already mentioned politics.
Yes.
Does that mean you have to pick your spots?
Yeah, I think you do. And like I said, I think IT was probably the easiest fit. Marketing is certainly a challenge. One of the things that I think we've been able to do, though, is take kind of baby steps with marketing. Promotional products, as you can imagine, the university has a ton of promotional goods. So that's an area where it's not necessarily creative, it's a little bit more of a commodity. And then we kind of moved into some of the things that we print them all the time and we don't have to create them every time. I still have not quite figured out how to get into those spaces where it's true advertising and media purchases and those types of very creative things where they want to get their hands on it. The other place that we do kind of struggle is we have a pretty large aviation school. So the aviation sector is a little bit hard. Sometimes you're buying used aircraft, which doesn't really fit into the model, but that's probably a pretty unique type of thing to be buying on a regular basis, which we do.
Probably has Rockwell controls. I would think. So Let's talk for a minute about productivity. One benefits of these tools, of course, is to increase throughput, to shorten cycle times, maybe really benefit productivity. Have you seen those kind of gains, and can you quantify productivity?
I think there hasn't been a clear measure that we put around it. The interesting part is, from my perspective and working directly with the users, the throughput time frame for us has been significantly minimized in combining all of the data once you've received it. So for us, I think that's probably the most serious.
So there's some efficiency gain of just getting the bid package out, collaborating with suppliers, but it's really crunching the numbers.
Yeah.
So do you run multiple what-if scenarios
So
to determine award?
there's probably a combination for us. I think that one of the key places we work closely with Zycus is on looking at how that process works once you've collected all of the bids back in. So I think we're still realizing some of that. With the Smart Award feature that was recently introduced and still looking for the face-to-face negotiation, which is almost complete, I think there will be a significant change for us as far as productivity goes. Main reason because those steps with our sourcing process will still taking place, and there's many things that are still done offline. So.
That's interesting. You bring up just for the benefit of the group here. So the idea is it's an eSourcing tool, and you want to capture, in one repository, one audit trail, everything that happened in that negotiation. But there's a critical step usually at the end of the process, which is still there's that face-to-face, and there's always the need for the relationship. But this is a way to document those face-to-face negotiations as part of the entire thread, and not lose that. So I think that is an exciting development. What are your thoughts on productivity, Karen, at AMD, and kind of where it falls as you look at the entire sourcing process?
All right, so, we are looking at the adoption, and the adoption did increase on the tool utilization. I think that it's not only driven by the tool, but the training that surrounds it. But also, Zycus really worked with us directly on scorecard capability within the system itself. And a few years back, it wasn't as robust as we had hoped it would be with regard to how we utilize the scoring process. We sat with Zycus, and they heard us. We gave them our voice on where we saw things needed to be modified potentially, and they worked with us to change that interface and improve it. And then we were able to pull some more scorecard directly into the system itself versus doing it offline. So I think that's been a gain.
And that scorecard again would be similar to what Candace talked about, is the analytics and really rating and ranking. And do you have multiple stakeholders across the business participating in that scorecarding process?
Absolutely, depending on what we're doing and who gets invited, but there's no limits to who can, how many scores you can have, which is beneficial too. And some of the other software solutions, you may have limitations on the number of observables or whatever they call them. So there's
And be interested too, Jamie, so in the higher education environment, we're talking about how these tools could drive productivity. I'd be interested, what are sort of some of the benchmarks that you may have been able to establish just in terms of what is the sourcing cycle time? Or is there no such thing as an average sourcing cycle time? It depends on the project.
It really does. And I think one of the places that it's saved us a lot of time, because we're not making anything per se, there's a lot of stuff that we might buy once a year or once every 2 years. So not having to go back and find Excel files that are on some shared drive somewhere and where the scorecards are, and having all of that in one repository, I think that has been a tremendous savings of time and an increase in productivity for us, because we're not having to go back and research stuff that we've already done previously.
Okay. Great. So before I invite the audience to add some questions, I thought a good way to sum up for each of you is to think about, based on your experience, what would you share as a couple of the key best practices, but also a couple of the pitfalls to be avoided, that if you had it to do over again, these are mistakes that I just wouldn't ever make again?
They're almost kind of together.
Yeah.
One thing I would say, and I know it was previously mentioned in the AMT presentation as well, is business process. And by having that really defined when you go into the implementation is key. And I think a good part for us is that we did have a pretty good process in place on the sourcing side of the house, but at the same time, there were always little nuances in different areas of the business and different sections that we had. So I would say for us, that would be probably the biggest pitfall to avoid, but also learning that we have during the process.
Thanks, Karen. What would you share? Words of wisdom.
Well, I think by moving to Zycus, I mean, what we found is that they were very willing to work with us, and we were not just a little fish in a big pond. So that was very beneficial as the overall relationship has developed and grown. Preparing for that data transfer, I think, is key. If you have your supplier, your existing supplier, we ended up forwarding all of our existing suppliers into the new tool and planning for that to make some of that change easier on the end user, so that when they go back into the new system, they don't have to recreate the wheel on a lot of that. As far as pitfalls, I mean, there's still challenges with capability on types of scenarios on our like rank only, that there's some patent issues around. I think that's something that we've struggled a little bit with, but Zycus is working with some flexible solutions in that areas.
Good. And Jamie, what would you consider some best practices and pitfalls?
Well, I think as you mentioned in one of the main sessions, when we get a new toy, we want everybody to use it, and we want everybody to be as passionate about it as we are. So I think one of the things that you have to keep in mind is, yes, we could probably go in and mandate it if we had to, but it's much easier to get buy-in from those folks and have them want to use it. And kind of along the same lines, as far as projects go and different types of things, don't try to make everything fit into the same mold. If you need to do some stuff on Excel spreadsheets like you used to, that's fine. You don't have to get everything in there right away.
Or just upload it from the Excel spreadsheet.
There you
That
go.
could work.
But take your time and don't rush it. Adoption is not as important as functionality and use and value that you get out of it.
Getting real traction.